Let's turn in our Bibles again to the Epistle of Paul to the Ephesians as we continue our expository series on this very important epistle. And we are in the last half now. We've crossed over chapter 4 and verse 1. We're in the last half of this epistle, which is largely dealing with practical issues. And I think today you'll be surprised at just how practical things have shifted. In the first 3 chapters, very doctrinal, and indeed the groundwork for everything that would follow. But now we come into that part of Ephesians, beginning in chapter 4, which deals with how the Christian is to walk worthily of the calling with which he's been called. And Paul begins with church unity. He speaks about the necessity and the importance of the local church. But then he goes into one after the other of these commands that we find in verse 25 of verse 4 all the way through chapter 5. And he deals with them very briefly. And we're going to take one small section at a time as we move through here and understand how these practical issues are to be worked out in the Christian life. Last week we looked at verse 25 of Ephesians 4. Therefore, having put away falsehood, or literally, therefore, having put away the lie, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Now we come to the next 2 verses, which don't deal with lying, how church members lie to one another. That's what we looked at last week. But now he quickly changes to another subject, another issue, another problem that we have because of our remaining sin. Verse 26 and 27. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. I believe these 2 verses should go together, and we're going to consider these 2 today. The issue is anger. And as we look at this text, we want to observe 3 things that the text is teaching us that we can see right away. Those 3 things are, number 1, there is such a thing as righteous anger. Number 2, sinful anger is forbidden. And number 3, the devil seeks to exploit our anger. Whether it's sinful or not, he will seek to exploit our anger. Those 3 things are taught for us in this text, and we'll speak on those one at a time, but then I'd like to conclude also with 7 practical directives. All right, let's begin then with number 1. This text tells us that there is such a thing as righteous anger. When someone's reading this text, he says, be angry and do not sin. Some people have thought, well, he's commanding us then to be angry. And I don't believe that's exactly how it ought to be taken. He's not commanding us to be angry. Be angry and don't sin. It's rather a Hebrew expression. In fact, here is where Paul is quoting from the Old Testament, Psalm 4, verse 4. Be angry and sin not. Now, if you go in your Old Testament and look up Psalm 4:4, it may not say be angry and sin not. It may say be amazed. And that's because Paul is quoting from the Septuagint, which I talked about in Sunday school today, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. And there in the Greek, translated by Hebrew scholars, they knew what the Hebrew word meant, and they translated it angry. So David in Psalm 4:4 is talking about anger. Be angry and sin not. He's quoting from that passage. And it's a Hebrew idiom. It's not so much saying be angry as a command, but rather, when you are angry, make sure that it's not sinful anger. When you get angry, it's almost a given. You're going to get angry. When you get angry, make sure that it's not the sinful, unrighteous kind of anger. Now, in just saying that, he's implying that there is such a thing, and there is the possibility of being angry without having sinful anger. And so if somebody were to come up to you and ask you this question, how would you respond? What if they came up to you and asked you this question? As a Christian, do you think that it's wrong or sinful to be angry? And what would you say in response to that question? Now, maybe before today, some of you would have said, yes, it's always wrong to be angry. well, then you would have been wrong. Because it's not always wrong to be angry. And you wouldn't want to say, yes, it's right to be angry, because you don't know exactly what anger it is that they're speaking of. So the best Christian biblical answer to give to somebody that has a question like that is, well, it depends. It depends. After all, we see in the Scriptures that Jesus was angry. The sinless, perfect Jesus. Remember when He cleansed the temple? Both times in the beginning of His ministry and at the end of His ministry, He went into the temple and He saw all of this falderall going on, all of this thievery and everything that would distract people from worship and prayer. And He not only had anger in His heart, the zeal of the Lord consuming Him, but He expressed it. He got a whip out and started cracking the whip, and He went up to the tables and overturned the tables. It was His temple. He had the right to do that. And He was filled with anger. On other occasions, in dealing with the Pharisees, because of the hardness of their hearts, because of their unbelief, because of their hypocrisy, because of their cruelty, they had taken their legalism to the point where people were suffering because of their stupid rules that they added to the Bible. All of that led Christ to be angry. And it says in the Bible that He was filled with anger and He looked upon them with anger. So, anger is not always sinful if Jesus Himself, the sinless one, can be angry. And we know that the Bible talks about God being angry and having wrath. Now, God is slow to wrath, but He still is a God of wrath. He's still a God of anger. So we know, at least theoretically, that it's possible to have anger without sinning. At least it was possible for Christ. But wouldn't you also say that it's possible for a Christian to be angry and sin not? Well, evidently it is, because Paul wouldn't have given this commandment if that weren't the case. In fact, brethren, I would submit to you that this text is addressing a couple of problems that we have today in Christianity. Not just the fact that we are so often sinfully angry. But there's another problem we have, especially in our day, in this postmodern day, where absolutes are denied. Nobody wants to call a spade a spade. Nobody wants to call evil evil. Nobody wants to make a hard and fast distinction between right and wrong. And so who are you to be angry at something when who are you to be angry at those terrorists for bombing that building? You need to understand them. You need to understand their culture, and you'll see if you immerse yourself in their perspective that they're doing only what's right in their own minds. And so how dare you pass judgment and be angry at that? See, they don't want to jump on board any truth claims. Because once you jump on a truth claim, then you have to defend that truth. Then you're angry at anything that is against the truth or that is a falsehood. But if nothing's true and nothing's false, well, then we don't need to be angry at anything, right? Well, see, especially in our day, we have to address this problem as well. Not just the issue of sinful anger, but the issue of those times when we should be angry and we're not. When should we be angry? Sin should anger us. Sin in the world, sin in others, sin in ourselves should anger us. When God's name is used irreverently, is it a time to laugh? Is it a time to be indifferent even? No, it's a time to be angry. Because God's name is at stake. His worship is being profaned. When men blaspheme God, when false doctrine is being taught that damns men's souls. Do you laugh at that? You think that's funny? Do you just walk away thinking, oh, that's a pity? Or do you get angry? There's something wrong with us if we don't get angry. Considering what's at stake, men's souls are perishing because of false doctrine. Was Luther wrong in being angry at the errors of Roman Catholicism? Now, I know that Luther overstepped the bounds many times, and he would have admitted it. Was he wrong in being angry initially at the false doctrine that was so cruel to men's souls? When we hear of or witness cruelty or barbarism, when we hear of a man who's battering his wife, you men out there, if you were to hear of a man that you knew in your sphere who was beating his wife, should that not raise up in your soul righteous anger? By all means. In fact, if righteous anger is not there, there's something wrong with you. Because if you love God and you love your neighbor and you love the truth, the flip side of that is an equal, proportionate passion of anger when those things are being violated. Luther was right to be angry. Paul was right to be angry against the Judaizers. Wilberforce was right to be angry at the cruelties of the slave trade. Lord Shaftesbury was right to be angry when he saw the horrible working conditions in the 1800s and the way children were being abused in those situations. Moses was right to be angry when he came down from the mountain and he saw them naked dancing around a golden calf. He was right to be angry. Now, lest you think I'm out on a limb, let me read to you a couple of quotes. John Stott said, "There is a great need in the contemporary world for more Christian anger. We human beings compromise with sin in a way in which God never does. In the face of blatant evil, we should be indignant, not tolerant. Angry, not apathetic. If God hates sin, His people should hate it too. If evil arouses His anger, it should arouse ours also." David said in Psalm 119:53, "Hot indignation seizes me because of the wicked who forsake thy law." What other reaction can wickedness be expected to provoke in those who love God? Let me warn you, brethren, against what I would call another species of hyper-Calvinism. Hyper-Calvinism. We know of some of its species. Now, here's another one. It bothers me, and perhaps you've heard this too, when you're speaking to someone who claims to believe in the sovereignty of God and the depravity, the total depravity of man, and you express your outrage at some terrible sin like abortion or like some of the violence that takes place in society, and you say something that gives the opinion to that person that you are outraged. And then this smug Calvinist says, "Well, man is just going to do that. He can't help it. He's totally depraved. So why are you getting all worked up about it? He's totally depraved." He is responsible nonetheless. And it's a form of hyper-Calvinism when we can stand apathetically by and watch great atrocities and sins and just say, "Oh, he's totally depraved." Yes, but men need to be confronted with their evil. And they need to be confronted with their responsibility to repent before God. Every time they sin, God is storing up wrath for the day of wrath. It's something to be angry at. Jesus Himself, when He saw the hardness of hearts and the unbelief, it wasn't that He didn't understand the doctrine of total depravity. It's that He fully understood the responsibility of man. Whereas they could not believe, they were responsible to believe. And He was angry at the unbelief and the hardness of heart. So let us not go down that road and think that the best stand for the Christian as he goes through this life is to kind of either ignore with a blind eye and a deaf ear, or go on apathetically observing sin all around him, insulating himself in his little Christian bubble. We're called upon to reprove the works of darkness. And I don't care where you're at, whether you're at work or whether you're at some fun occasion. If somebody is blaspheming the name of God, you need to step up to the plate. That should anger you. And you need to reprove the works of darkness. If you were witnessing something where someone was being abused or hurt, you need to act. You need to have anger in your heart. Because sin should cause you to be angry. Now, one Puritan, John Trapp, was able to sum this all up. And he said, "He that will be angry and not sin, let him be angry at nothing but sin." That's a little handy, pithy comment that I think will help us understand when it is appropriate to be angry and when it's not. Let me quote to you Thomas Boston. He said, "The love and respect which we owe to God, who is dishonored, requires that we be angry over sin. The love which we have to others who are injured requires that we be angry over sin that hurts them. Let us be filled with holy indignation against ourselves because of the sins of our nature, hearts, lips, and lives. Let us be angry at the dishonor done to God by others. Alas," listen to this statement, "we are very quickly set in a flame if but a word seems to reflect on us. But how cold are we in the matters that dishonor God? We hear somebody say something that slanders us or that is an insult to us, and we get inflamed very quickly. We hear blasphemies against God, and it doesn't inflame us. What's happening here? We ought to be angry. So the first thing that we need to see in this text is that it implies that there is such a thing as righteous anger. Now, I am not encouraging you all now to go out and find as many things as you possibly can as an excuse to get angry. But I am saying that if you're not angry over sin, then something is wrong. It's a mark of spiritual health when we get angry at sin. If you don't express or feel anger toward the sins of society, I wonder if you even feel it toward your own sins. Because the flip side of an intense love of God and your neighbor and the truth is going to result in an equally intense anger when those things are being blasphemed or violated or hurt. Now, that's really not our focus today, but we have to clear the air because that's important. The second thing we need to note that our text teaches is that sinful anger, unrighteous anger, is forbidden. Be angry, but when you get angry, make sure it's not the sinful kind. Do not sin. Now, right away, we can be faced with something that's countercultural. It seems like every sentence of the Bible is countercultural. But we're told today that, you can't really help what you feel. If I feel angry, that's the way I feel. How can you tell me not to feel that way? And this is what Paul is basically saying. He's saying if you find that your anger is sinful, then you need to stop being angry. And so people with today's mentality would think, well, how can you even tell me not to be angry when I can't really help how I feel? I'm not responsible for my feelings, am I? Well, evidently you are. And that's one of the things that is under the surface, too. It's kind of an underlying principle upon which Paul is operating. You feel passion, you feel anger, then stop that. What do you mean stop that? Well, what's another underlying truth alongside of that we find here? Well, it means that the emotions are not to be in the driver's seat. If somehow he is telling Christians to stop being angry, to be lord over their emotions, in a sense, to have control, then he is also implying that emotions are not to have control. There's something that is to be above the emotions, containing it, controlling it, restraining it, even quenching it. And what is that? That's the mind. The mind. So we have the emotions, which are subject to the mind, and the mind is to be subject to the Word of God. And that's the correct order. When you let the emotions get away and take control, then that's when a lot of things go wrong, and you're sinning everywhere and doing all kinds of wicked, unrighteous things. In fact, the Latin word, the word passion, used to be a word that was considered very wrong and negative. It was never used in a favorable way. Today, passion has kind of taken on a new meaning, and it can even mean something romantic or even impassioned preaching. At one time, passion was not a good word because it comes from the Latin word passio, and it meant to be completely out of control. It meant to be passive and allowing your feelings to run you, to control you. We know, as we're going to mention in a few minutes, that anger is sinful when it's controlling us rather than we controlling it. Now, we're faced with this countercultural idea that when we feel sinful anger, we're to do something about it. We're not to just let it have its way with us. We're not to do as the Freudian psychologists tell us to do, go to the person we're angry at and totally vent, because that's the therapeutic thing to do. The only way to get this poison out of you is to let it all out. The lanced boil theory. You've got this boil. The only way to get rid of that boil is to let all that stuff come out. No! Freud was wrong. And all the people that follow his teachings are wrong. The Bible tells us that the way to deal with anger is not to let it all out. In fact, it's to stop it before it can come out and to control it. Sinful, unrighteous anger is forbidden. Thomas Boston describes sinful anger as the vomit of a proud heart and unmeekened spirit. Next time you think about letting it all out, as if that's going to be therapeutic to you, which of course is not even taking into consideration all the damage, even permanent damage, your hateful words and actions can have on people around you. It's all about you. Next time you feel like venting it all out, think of the vomit, the ugly stuff coming out of your proud heart. Because that's what anger is. That's what sinful anger is. It's also a form of murder. Jesus taught that this kind of sinful anger is heart murder. We murder people in our hearts. We murder people with our angry words and with our feelings of revenge. Sometimes our anger starts out righteous and ends up unrighteous. And that's the sneaky way in which the devil can get in there. He hangs around angry people. And he hangs around angry people because whether they're angry over something that is righteous, if it's a righteous anger or unrighteous, it doesn't matter to the devil, because he'll take advantage and exploit anger wherever it's seen. And very many of God's people, in fact, we can all testify, that even when our anger begins in a righteous way, we're so full of sin, we're so full of corruption, and we're so self-deceived oftentimes that we cross the line and it becomes sinful anger. What started out as right has now become wrong. So the question is, as we consider this whole prohibition against sinful anger, the question is how can we tell the difference between righteous anger and unrighteous anger? When can we tell that we've crossed the line? And we may have started out righteous, but now we're in an unrighteous situation. How can we test ourselves? And I want to suggest 4 things to you. 4 tests. We're still under the main heading of point number 2, but we have 4 tests that we can apply to ourselves as to the distinction between righteous and unrighteous anger. The first thing that we can do or say or ask ourselves is, when our anger is directed at God, then we know it is sinful. So that clears away a lot of anger right there. When our anger is directed at God, then we know it's sinful. Do you believe that? It is never right, never, ever right to be angry at God. Because to be angry at God is basically saying to God, God, you didn't do what I wanted you to do. What? God not only has the right to do whatever He pleases and He doesn't need to consult you, but He knows best. Whatever He does is all wise. Whatever He does is right. There's no debating God. You get angry with God, and you are now in a very precarious situation. In fact, you are in a place that would probably be rightly called lunacy. You against God? I know who's going to win that one. Now, if you're angry at God, what is it for? Because He didn't do what you wanted Him to do. So you're already showing that your anger is based upon a self-centered view of life and yourself. God revolves around you. He exists for your happiness. He did something you didn't expect. He threw a curveball in your life. He took something from you that was dear to you. Remember, you didn't even deserve it in the first place. And what do you deserve? And are you God's counselor? Is He to consult with you and ask you if He can do this before He does it? You see, it's the height of pride and self-centeredness to be angry at God. We've all been angry at God at times. I'm thankful for the book of Jonah. I'm thankful for 2 reasons. I'm thankful that there is another saint in Scripture, and he's not the only one. David was angry at God. But Jonah was angry at God for showing mercy to the Ninevites. I'm thankful that Jonah is in the Bible because I think there's hope for me, therefore. That it's possible for a person to truly be a believer and yet at the same time fall into this grievous sin of being angry at God. And it's grievous. But I'm also thankful for Jonah because of the way God responded to him. Instead of just throwing him back out in the ocean, God said to Jonah, are you doing right to be angry? Do you do well to be angry, Jonah? What a What a kind and tender way of dealing with Jonah's anger. And then Jonah says, yes, I am right. My, oh my. The fact that God didn't just totally annihilate him on the spot is a testimony to his covenant love to his people. And there is forgiveness with God through Jesus Christ. But it's always wrong to be angry at God. Now let me throw this in while I'm at it. There are ways in which we who believe in the sovereignty of God and in the providence of God, that he's ruling over all things, that even the small things in our lives are brought into our lives by his providence. There's a tricky way in which those of us who believe those doctrines are able to euphemize our anger at God in such a way that we successfully convince our own consciences. We justify our sin. How is that? Well, let's say you've had a bad hair day. No, I don't have that kind of problem. There's days when we feel really bad and under the weather. We get cut off on the highway. We clash with someone at work. We hit all the red lights. On the one day that we thought we could leave a little later than usual, we hit all the red lights. We have to wait in long grocery lines. We travel through the rain to get to an ATM machine. We get there and it's out of order. We get to the pharmacist, and though you've had your prescriptions filled hundreds of times, for some reason they don't know where it is. I'm just giving personal examples. And what happens? Well, we start to get angry. It builds. It builds. And we get home and we take it out on our family. And then somebody in the family, like a wife or a daughter, will say something like, you shouldn't get angry. This is providence. This is God's providence. You shouldn't be angry. And then the self-righteous and proud Calvinist, who's used to dodging those kinds of accusations, is able to say, well, I'm not angry at God. I'm just angry at the situation. I'm angry at the circumstances. No. You know what? You're lying to yourself when you do that. God sees right through it all. You're angry at him. To say you're angry at life or angry at circumstances or angry at the situation is to say you're angry at God who is controlling those circumstances. So quit doing that kind of trick on your conscience. God sees right through it, and now hopefully you will see right through it. It's always wrong to be angry at God. Now here's a second test. When our anger is directed toward someone, but not because of sin, then we know it's sinful. It's sinful anger. It's wrong to be angry at someone when it's not a sin issue. Someone spills a glass of milk by accident on your nice new tablecloth, and you get all angry. Is that righteous anger? No, it's not righteous anger. That calls for patience. Or your wife calls up and says, honey, I locked myself out of the car and I need you to come and let me in. And you get all angry. Is that a righteous anger? No. It wasn't a sin that she locked herself out of the car. You don't get invited to a certain function that you thought you should have been invited to. And you get angry. You feel left out. Is that a righteous anger? No. Did they sin in not inviting you? How many parties and get-togethers have you had at your house? Have you invited everyone that you know? Did you ever think that was a sin not to invite everyone? Then why are you getting all angry when they don't invite you? As if it's a great crime and travesty and sin. It's not. Someone gets that promotion, or someone gets recognition or an award, something that you were hoping you would get and you didn't get it. And you get angry at that person. That's called jealousy and envy. It's not righteous anger. It's unrighteous. There's a host of examples. You'll have to apply this to yourself. But when you find yourself getting angry, you need to ask the question, what sin was committed here? Who sinned that I'm angry? Why am I angry? Is it over a sin issue? And if it's not, then you immediately know it's unrighteous anger. No more questions asked. It's usually because of your own selfishness, impatience. Brethren, when I first came to California and went to the grocery store, I felt like I was constantly being hurried along by everyone behind me and around me. I was used to taking my time in nice wide aisles. And I have found that in 3 years, I'm just like one of you now. And now I find myself getting angry at the grocery store. I walk in, I go down these aisles that are too narrow, and when there's some kind of a demo in the middle of the aisle, then you can't pass with somebody's blocking the way. And there's so many times where I've gotten behind somebody who's oblivious to my presence, who's taking an inordinate amount of time to pick out their special brand of cranberry juice, and I get very angry. And I'm angry at someone I don't even know. And they're not sinning. That's sinful anger, impatience, selfishness. And we have a lot of that. The wrath of man works not the righteousness of God. A third test to apply to ourselves is when our anger is uncontrolled, then we know that it's sinful. Even if our anger arises for a righteous cause, if it gets out of control, then it is sinful. It has become sinful. What I mean by uncontrolled anger is anger that is actually controlling you, leading you, prompting you to sin by thinking thoughts of revenge or malice or returning fire for fire, prompting you to lash out or harbor bitterness or dwell long upon people's sins and offenses. Even if it is over a righteous thing, it can easily turn into unrighteous when it controls you and grips you and moves you to do things that sometimes become worse than the original offense. Listen to Richard Baxter. He said this of anger: uncontrolled anger injures humanity and rebels against reason. All passion should always be under the control of reason. It is madness, and like the crime of drunkenness, to suppress and dethrone our reason. That means the mind. It is madness, and like the crime of drunkenness. Sinful anger is temporary madness or drunkenness, since our reason is set aside. Remember that you are a man, and that is a dishonor to yield to fury like an animal. And so, in the same way that we wouldn't want to drink so much that we're no longer able to be in control of our actions and our words, so we don't want to have anger go from something that is righteous to something that is out of bounds and out of control, that is controlling us. Uncontrolled anger is also when it expresses itself disproportionately to the offense. If a fly is irritating you in the house, do you go out and rent a wrecking ball? No, that's silly. Now, how many times have we either gotten angry ourselves or have seen others get angry, and the anger that's being displayed is nowhere near. It's far above the anger that this situation calls for. And I was reminded of this the other day when I was waiting in a drive-thru. And I had my window down, waiting for the person in front of me to get through with his order. Another moment where my patience was being tried, because this person had a large family, lots of kids, and he had a long order. And I still believe that people like that need to get out of their car, go into the restaurant, and order it at the counter. And the drive-thru should be for people who have smaller orders. But I overheard what was going on because my window was down. And he kept changing his order because I think some of the kids in the car were changing their minds. And this otherwise professional-looking, respectable-looking man began to come unglued and started yelling at the top of his lungs at his family, "Why? Why? Why did you change?" And it became really ugly. It became embarrassing to me to be a witness to this. And then I thought, I've had impatient moments over the same issues before. Is that the way I look? Oh, that is terrible. And that is what out-of-control anger is about. If your anger is controlling you, then you know it's wrong. Whether you had original good cause or not, it's wrong when it's overstepped its bounds. Fourth test, when our anger is self-serving, then we know that it is sinful. When it's self-serving. John MacArthur said, anger that is sin is anger that is self-defensive and self-serving, that is resentful of what is done against oneself. It is the anger that leads to murder and to God's judgment, Matthew 5. Anger that is selfish, undisciplined, and vindictive is sinful and has no place even temporarily in the Christian life. But anger that is unselfish and is based on love for God and concern for others not only is permissible, but commanded. So, you're at home. You want the house to be quiet, not so noisy anymore. You feel irritated. Is that a proper occasion to become angry? No. It's not righteous anger. The kind of anger you would express in that situation would be selfish, self-serving kind of anger. It calls for something other than anger. So you feel hurt by something someone said to you, you get angry, thinking that your anger is justified, when in reality it's just a selfish kind of anger. You might think that, no, I'm angry at sin. They said something about me or to me that was sinful. They owe me an apology, and I have every right to be angry here. I'm not angry because of selfish reasons. I'm angry because they sinned against me. Oh, really? Put that to the test. Do you get that angry over other sins? Or is it just when the sin is against you? Do you get angry when you hear people blaspheming the name of God? Or do you get as angry about that as you do about this personal insult? If not, then it's not all righteous. It's really all about you. It's selfish. We get way more offended about sins committed against ourselves than we do about sins that are committed against God. Now, sometimes people sin against us, and that is a sin against God. But why the disproportionate response when people sin against us as compared to how we respond when we see people sinning against God? See, we're very deceitful to ourselves. And we need to discern between righteous and unrighteous anger in order that we might put it to death. Now, the third main point. The first one was there is such a thing as righteous anger. Secondly, sinful anger is forbidden. Thirdly, our text teaches us that the devil seeks to exploit our anger. Paul is saying be angry, but make sure that your anger is the righteous kind of anger, not the unrighteous. And then he adds two more phrases. He says, do not let the sun go down on your anger or your wrath. By the way, he uses a different word there than he uses at the beginning of verse 26. There is one word at the beginning, anger. Then this word, which is translated anger or wrath, has a preposition added to the front of it, the preposition para. And it basically illustrates when anger goes from something that might be righteous to begin with, but then exceeds its boundaries, goes beyond the parameters of righteous anger, which reinforces our last point. But he says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath, and deal with your anger, therefore, right away, because the devil will seek to exploit it. Now, don't be a hyper-literalist. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Okay, so then I have about 6 hours to hang on to my anger before I deal with it. Now, don't be a hyper-literalist, because, by the way, if you love to be angry, move to Greenland, because 3 months out of the year, the sun never sets. So you could hang on to your anger for 3 months. Obviously, that's not what the intention is here. The figure of speech means dispatch with your anger as soon as possible. Deal with it. Deal with it. Even the righteous kind, because the righteous kind can easily become unrighteous. The devil loves to be around angry people because he can exploit it. He can fan the flames. I don't know exactly how he is able to do that, but even with Christian people, Paul says the devil is there to take opportunity. And the longer you hold on to anger, even the righteous kind, the more opportunity, literally the Greek word is topos, it means place. The more places in your relationships with each other, the devil has opportunity to land on those places with his forces, his evil, destructive forces, and create havoc in the local church, which is pretty much the context in which Paul is dealing with here. Righteous anger, even if it is righteous, because of our weakness and our sin, is like manna from heaven. If it's kept overnight, it will breed worms. The worms of bitterness, resentment, grudges, irritability, hostility, estrangement, suspicion, self-righteousness. Don't go to bed with anger. Because when you go to bed with anger, you go to bed with the devil. He that goes to bed with the devil will probably wake up with the devil. Married couples, you go to bed angry at each other, there's a third person in your bed with you, and it's the devil. And he will drive a wedge wherever he can, and he'll fan the flames, and it'll become greater and greater and greater. And maybe, by the grace of God, you might come to your senses and say, how did it get this far? It was just over that one little thing. Well, how did it get this big? It's because you let the sun go down on your wrath. You didn't deal with it. Sinclair Ferguson said, "It is right to get angry about some things, but remaining angry when the sun goes down, that is at the end of the day, is a sign that instead of expressing right judgment, anger has mastered us." Notice Paul's underlying concern here. Believers must not allow the devil a foothold in their relationships with one another. The more we allow alienation to fester in our anger, the more opportunity we give Satan to twist hearts, spread rumors, stimulate self-justification, and spawn party spirit. Satan has many things in us on which he can land and engage in his destroying work. So, don't play with fire. If there's a spark of anger in your heart, even if it's righteous anger, don't let it turn into a flame, because that flame will become a forest fire. And it needs to be dealt with quickly and suppressed. Now, in conclusion, let me just give to you 7 quick directives by way of application. 7 distilled thoughts in modern English that I gleaned from Thomas Boston and Richard Baxter. The first thing that will help us in fighting against anger, sinful anger, is number 1, work on maintaining right attitudes. Out of the heart flow the issues of life, so we need to guard the heart. The attitudes of the heart really is where it all starts. The person who gets angry a lot is the person who is not guarding his heart. He's not doing that soul work. In fact, the person who gets angry all the time is the proud person. Because nobody gets offended so easily as the proud person. The person who thinks he's all that. So any little insult, any little thing, even a slight thing, is too much for the proud person to handle. He gets angry. So, in other words, lowliness of mind, which Paul spoke about earlier in this chapter, is the kind of attitude that we're to cultivate. Humility. Not be so conceited and stuck up and proud about who we are. Realize who we really are. That's why it's helpful to meditate upon your sinfulness. Not so that you'll stay there and wallow in it or have some kind of false humility. But brethren, if we don't ponder our own sinfulness and shortcomings before the Lord, how are we going to remain in a humble condition? If we're always forgetting how sinful we are, we're going to jump on everybody for all their weaknesses and their slip of the mouth. So we need to be humble. That's one part of that, maintaining that right attitude. We also have to be considering that God is watching us and that others are watching us as representatives of the God we claim to worship. We need to remember our vileness and unworthiness. Consider all the times you've provoked the Lord. All the mercy He's shown to you in Christ. Are you going to turn around then and wring the neck of somebody who's offended you in this little matter? Matthew 18. The second application is, do not be hasty to make judgments or to spout off. Some people get angry over nothing. And then some people get angry over something which turns out to be nothing. Let's say you hear an evil report. Somebody comes to you and says, you know what so-and-so said about you? Oh, what did so-and-so say about me? Really, our reaction should be, I don't want to hear it. I'm going to go to that person and ask them myself. But sometimes, or most of the time, we'll listen. You know what so-and-so said about you? What? They said this and they said that, and then you find yourself getting angry. And you might not even have the facts. And that person telling you maybe not even purposely, leaving out certain key facts and the context. And sometimes they're purposely trying to rile you up because they want you to be angry just like they're angry at this person. And so how do we get someone else angry and on my side? Well, I'll just emphasize the parts that will work in concert with my with my scheme. And the best of us do that. Well, don't make hasty judgments. You hear something that you all of a sudden feel this wrath coming in your heart, be slow to speak and slow to wrath. Gather the facts first. Or if you choose, let love cover it. But do not flame up in anger before you have heard all the facts. Matthew 18 also instructs us to go to that person individually, one-on-one. Thirdly, if you cannot restrain your anger in the moment, get away alone to a quiet place. I don't know about you, but when I'm ready to vomit, I don't do it in front of everyone. At least if I can help it, I run to another room. And that's what you probably do too. When you are feeling angry and there's people around you that you're angry at, get out of there. Even if you're not angry at them, you're ready to display your anger, go somewhere else. If you can't control it, at least get away from people. Because you don't want to bring them in on it. You don't want to provoke them to anger as well. You don't want God to be, His name to be dragged through the mud through your terrible example. Anger is sinful, but why share it with everyone else, you see? That's very practical. Because there will be times when you'll have to do just that. Get alone with God, and then the fire may burn down. Fourthly, don't brood over past offenses. Don't go to bed with and exhume all of the past offenses of your life. Don't get that long laundry list of complaints you have against so-and-so or so-and-so or so-and-so. Things that you actually said in the past that you've forgiven. But you've proven that you haven't really forgiven because now you're dragging them out again and looking over them, or you're thinking in your mind and you're brooding over all the past offenses, so that this little thing that irritates you now about a person seems to have more weight to it because now it's backed up by all these other things that you've exhumed from their grave. Fifthly, and here's a good one, Richard Baxter, consider how ugly sinful anger is. Like the guy in the drive-thru. Richard Baxter said, look at others in their passion and consider how unlovely they make themselves. Think of the frowning countenances, flaming eyes, threatening, devouring looks, and harmful tendencies of those controlled by passion. And then consider whether these are desirable examples to follow. Observe how unlovely and displeasing you are to those who observe you. Anger deforms the countenance and takes away the sweet and pleasant appearance that you have when you express a calm and loving temperament. If you were always like this, would anybody love you? Would they not get out of your way if they did not lay hands on you, as they would to anything that is wild or mad? You would not want your portrait drawn while in a state of fury. Your frowns and inflamed blood mar your countenance. Do not love that which makes you so unlovely to others. Anger is ugly. Something to consider. Sixthly, consider how dangerous sinful anger is. It will eat you up as well as those around you. It's dangerous to your soul because you can't hold on to anger and worship God aright. You can't pray the way you need to be praying. And you can't receive the Word of God into your heart with meekness if you're hanging on to bitterness and anger and malice in your heart. You can't do it. It's dangerous for that reason. It's dangerous because it dishonors God in the world and sets a terrible example. And then lastly, confess your sinful anger immediately to men and to God. Confess it immediately to men and to God. Once again, Baxter says, when you are tempted to sin in anger, say to those around you, I feel a sinful anger rising in my heart, and I'm tempted to forget God's presence and act in a way that is not proper for His glory and speak provoking words that I know would be displeasing to Him. He says, in confessing your temptation, you will break the force of it and stop the fire so that it does not progress. With prudence and due caution, this is an excellent remedy to follow if you are willing to do so. How practical can you get? As soon as you feel anger, tell the people around you, I'm feeling anger. And then if they're good Christian brethren, what should they do? They should calm you down, reason with you. Brother, we don't want you to sin. Don't be sinfully angry at this time. And if you confess it even before it occurs, as you sense that it's occurring, then oftentimes the fire is put out. And then also, when you do find yourself sinfully angry, make sure that you confess your sin to God. Ask Him to help you to have a calm heart. Remember the Lord Jesus Christ and how when He was reviled, He reviled not again. He who had the right to be angry, He who could have been angry at personal wrongs done to Him, by virtue of the fact that He was the Creator, by virtue of the fact that He was sinless and had no sinful motives in His anger. He is the one who could have been angry at every step of the way. But as an example for us, to show us sinners how we're to live, when He was reviled not again. And He is the one who is our example to follow in His steps. Now, if He is the one who is the perfect example, we need to remember Him, but He's also the one who has all the strength and grace we need to follow His example. So when we feel anger coming on, that's not the time to forget God. That's the time to get on our knees and plead with our great high priest, Lord, I want more of what You had. I need strength. I need Your grace to resist sinful anger. So our text reads, Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, and give no opportunity to the devil. May the Lord help us then to be more like Christ, angry about the right things, and mortifying our sinful anger. Let's pray.